Ahoj a vítej u třetího dílu podcastu Za školou České středoškolské unie. V dnešním díle se pobavíme jednak tedy o americké ambasádě a její činnosti a druhak o americké obdobě školních samospráv a studiů v USA. Rozhovor dnes proběhne z větší části v angličtině, protože přes tak řečenou kaluž nás směrem na západ přinese ředitel amerických center a zástupce kulturního ataše americké ambasády v Praze, pan Douglas Morro, jehož si tedy dovolím uvést ještě jednou v jeho mateřštině.
It is an honor to welcome here at our podcast the Deputy Cultural Attaché of the United States Embassy in Prague, Mr. Douglas D. Morro. Mr. Morro, thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Well, like right off the bat, I think it would be the best for me to give you like a space to introduce yourself and kind of like present the responsibilities that you have within the embassy and the duties that you take on.
Sure. So, jmenuji se Doug Morro, jsem americký diplomat, pracuji už na velvyslanství USA poslední 2 roky a budu pokračovat ještě 1 rok. Jsem ředitel naší sítí amerických center v České republice. Tím myslím, máme hlavní centrum tady v Praze a pak pobočky v Plzni, v Brně a v Ostravě. Jsem taky zodpovědný za všechny programy se týkající mládež, například naše výměnní programy, kulturní programy a programy vzdělávání a tak dále.
Great. Could you kind of like reveal what led you to this position? What was to what institutions you had your allegiance in the past?
Sure. So I grew up in the state of Illinois, about an hour and a half west of Chicago. I moved for university to the state of California, where I studied at a small liberal arts college in Los Angeles. Spent a few years traveling around the world, moved back to Los Angeles, where I worked at a children's museum developing environmental education programs for kids. And then became an English teacher moving around the world. And at the end of that, decided to become an American diplomat about 11 years ago. And since then, I've worked at our embassies, consulates, or other diplomatic institutions in Bangladesh, Ukraine, Egypt, Iraq, and I did 1 posting back in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. That's quite a CV right there. Well, could you maybe, because the embassy, of course, cares a lot about activities regarding both culture and education. So could you maybe highlight the differences between American and Czech education and compare their respective strengths and weaknesses?
Sure. I think, so if you look at what we would call elementary school or middle school level, say age 5 to about 13 or 14, there's not really that many differences between a student's education in the United States and in the Czech Republic. The biggest difference is who gets to control what is taught. So in the Czech Republic, you have a Ministry of Education that sets a national standard for what all schools need to teach at every level. We don't have that. Instead, every school district is sort of autonomous, and the city and the people who run the schools in that city get to decide what are the standards of education for each grade level. Now, at the end of the day, these are all professionals who have master's degrees in education, and so school to school, district to district, education is going to look very similar. But there's no national ministry enforcing what each school has to teach. So that gives them an opportunity to sometimes be creative and to try out different ways of teaching and learning that might work and might not, but it creates more ground for experimentation. In high school, I think the biggest difference is that in the United States, students have more opportunity to to really choose what kinds of classes they want to take. So we have a whole section of classes called electives. So it's not that the school says you must take this particular math class and this science class and this history class. You have some of that, but then you have options. You choose as a student what other courses you want to take that match with your interests. And that's very similar to what you see in American universities. So in a Czech university, typically you have to decide what you want to study before you join that university. That's not true at American universities. At American universities, typically the first 2 years you spend exploring many, many different classes in different fields. And then only in the last 2 years do you decide on your specialization and really focus on those core courses. So we have this idea of a liberal arts education that's about creating a citizen of the country, not just a specialist in one field, but someone who's able to think critically about their role as a citizen in a democracy and to understand multiple points of view and how different subjects connect. So there's advantages and disadvantages. You know, if you want to just be a top-notch engineer, maybe all you need is just 4 years of very intense engineering study. But we have a different approach to our education that focuses more on building a citizen.
That is fascinating, especially the fact that you don't have any sort of like a body enforcing the curriculum on a federal or state level. Like that is news for me. I thought there was some kind of department of education that enforces it on such a large scale, but apparently it does not.
Let me just to clear up, we do have a Department of Education, but their job is not to establish what the curriculum is. Instead, they provide general guidance and suggestions, and they also help enforce civil rights legislation as it applies to schools. So ensuring that all schools are providing all students a fair education.
Mm. Okay. Well, then you did highlight some of the differences, and kind of like to follow up on that, I wonder why exactly should one study in the United States, and how should one go about pursuing such a goal?
So I think, first of all, it really depends on what you're looking for. The American model of education, both at high school and in university, requires more independence from the student. So it requires the student to take more control over the direction of their education, because you do just have to make more choices. What class am I going to take? What am I interested in? And it also challenges you to really think about the connections between different fields. So again, if you are, 14 or 15 and you're totally sure that you want to become a mechanic or a teacher or an engineer, you know exactly what you want to do with your life, maybe the American education system isn't the right choice for you, because you do get less depth at the end of the day. We focus more on breadth. But if you're at a point in your life where you're not sure exactly what you're looking for, and you'd still like some more time to explore, then I think the American education model makes a lot of sense. If you're interested in studying at the high school level, there are various private sector exchanges where you can work with a Czech agency to be placed in the United States for 1 year. We also have a few slots open. We had 14 slots open this year in a program called FLEX, Future Leaders Exchange Program, where the US government pays the full cost for those 14 Czech high school students to study for 1 year in the United States. At the university level, I think that's where it becomes much more common for Czechs to study in the United States. We do have an office in Prague and also advisors at our branch cultural centers in Pilsen, Brno, and Ostrava that can help Czech students who want to learn about how to study in the United States figure out how to do that. So looking at questions of, when do I need to start doing research? How do I choose a university that's good for me? What kinds of tests or applications do I have to complete? How do I find financing for my university? Those advisors are really well placed to help each individual Czech student figure out the answers to those questions for themselves. And we also do have other US government scholarships and opportunities for people both at the university level, at the master's level, the doctoral level, and also the postdoctoral level. We have programs that can fully pay for Czech students to travel and study in the United States.
Which is like, it reminds me of this statistic that I once read. How you mentioned that it is suitable for some kind of people. I read that like the vast majority of world leaders and those working in the public sector do have either British or American higher education. So I guess those are the kind of people that really are thinking what to do with what exactly should their future jobs be, when they're maybe not exactly sure, which you did mention as well.
Absolutely. I've never seen that statistic, but it's interesting. And it makes sense to me because, again, our focus of education is about building a whole person and a citizen of a democracy. So it makes sense that people who are interested in rising to higher levels of public service in government might have benefited from that style of education that really teaches them to understand the whole world as a system. If you're going into government and you want to end up being the prime minister someday, you need to understand business and science and the arts and sociology and culture. You can't be a specialist and make it to the highest levels of government. So that makes sense to me.
Which even now coming back to what you said about building a citizen, that it could be said that is so embedded deeply into the American standard of education to the point where it is practically unimaginable or unbelievable for a Czech student to imagine that at a secondary education level they'd be doing something like the Pledge of Allegiance or the way in which it is embedded into American culture is something that I've never seen elsewhere.
Absolutely. And, I agree with that. I think that our schools really function as a way of training our future voters and citizens. Student government is an important part of every single high school. I know it exists in some schools here, but it's a big thing in the United States. There's always, the class president and the vice president and the student council, and they act as the voice of the student population with the school administration, so they can bring up specific issues that they're having and sort of act as the union or the lobby for the students. On top of that, almost every high school in America has a school newspaper and, press. We often call that the fourth estate in democracy. So we have, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch, and the media is what we think of as the fourth part of a successful democracy. So we train people very young on the importance of understanding how to critically read the press, and also what it goes to actually research a paper or research a story and put that out there.
Yeah, which in the case of the Czech Republic, I feel like that only came into being very recently for students to be able to independently write about what is going on in their schools. Even the student deliberative body, which you've mentioned, which I'm not really sure if they do gather on like a regional level in America too, because here we not only have what we call student councils or student parliaments, but we also have a way for them to assemble either on a national level or on a regional level. So it's kind of like an upwards power structure. I don't know if there's something like a national student government in the US.
You know, I don't know the answer to that offhand, but that's fascinating. I would love to learn more about that. What you have in the Czech Republic, that sounds fascinating. In the United States, again, because we have this very decentralized system of education, there might be less push for that, just because one student council, their voice is really going to impact that school or that school district. But because each school district is autonomous, there's not a lot of room for students from, say, the American equivalent of Šumperk to impact the schooling practices in Karlovy Vary.
Yeah. That's a nice parallel right there, yeah. Now, the U.S. Embassy supports projects that aim to bring the two countries together on the level of culture or education, as I said, by the means of what it refers to as small grants, if that's correct. And now, how does the decision-making process within the embassy work when it comes to which projects to support or to not support?
Yeah, so this is it's a really, it makes me so happy that we do this, and it also breaks my heart every time we run this, because if you look at the total number of good ideas out there, there are way too many for us to fund. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at is, you know, let's say 70 or 80 really good ideas, and we only have enough funding for 10. So we're not saying, oh, this is not a good idea. We're really just saying, wow, these are really good ideas. And so how do we rank order them? How do we decide which one of these projects is just a little bit more important at this time and this place, and given our priorities, than another one? And that is a difficult process. So we have a two-step system. The first one, we have typically, I don't know, 7 to 10 people, and that's both Americans and our Czech employees, who read through every single grant application and then sit down for several hours, and we go over these. I think we're doing this tomorrow. And we basically talk about them and give them our individual scores, average those scores, and then based on the funding we have available, we take, you know, the top 10 or the top 15, sometimes top 20, and we as a group decide, okay, these are what we think are the strongest ones. These are the ones that make the most sense, will have the most impact, have the clearest goals, and really share our values and our priorities. After that, we move it to a higher level where we have very senior officials in the embassy take a look just at the ones that we forwarded to them. And then they go through and they put those in their own rank order. And we see how many of those we're able to partially or fully fund. So two-step process where, again, we're really struggling to take a lot of good ideas and just decide which ones happen to be the best.
Mm-hmm. And could you maybe be a little more specific, like which projects did the program support in the past, or is there a specific one that our listeners have the opportunity to participate in?
Oh, man. So I would, you know, I am 40 years old, which is old, and my ability to remember things is basically gone at this point in my life. We do have lists. Anyone who's interested can check out. We publish the full list of every grant we've ever supported on our website. So those are all there. But, you know, it really ranges the gamut. It could be things like we're bringing American folk or jazz or hip hop artists to the Czech Republic to engage people in cultural conversations. It could be focusing on NGOs that are supporting individuals who maybe have experienced discrimination in the Czech Republic, like the Roma community. We could be focusing on helping connect female business leaders so that they can share their experiences about how they've been able to succeed and help other young aspiring women business leaders grow. I could probably rattle through 30 or 40 more examples, but we're looking at places where we think that we can make a difference in some way. We're trying to be good neighbors.
Well, I think we're slowly coming to some sort of a conclusion. As to the very last question that I would like to ask you, it's a question that we ask each and every one of our guests, because we're trying to connect with our listeners on a level of their student life, and maybe help them through the problems that they're going through. And therefore, we're asking each and every one of our guests, if you could give a single piece of advice to your high school self, what would it be?
So my biggest piece of advice would be calm down. I think when people are in high school, you're at this really unique moment in life where you have the intellectual capacity to really wrestle with the tough questions of the world, but you don't necessarily have the life of experience to put things in perspective and understand, this is really a life-changing thing versus this is not life-changing. So, if your girlfriend or boyfriend breaks up with you, it feels like the end of the world. But in fact, for almost everyone who has that experience, life will go on. You will grow, you will have other relationships, you will move on. Failure and hurt and heartbreak is part of life. It helps us grow. We can learn from it. We can learn from our own failures. I think this is an area I often point to as a place where America has something to really teach the world, because we're not very afraid of risk. We're very happy to take risks, and we're happy to fail because we think that's how we grow. That's how we learn. And we can become better at the game of life by taking risks and failing, as long as we're open to learning from those experiences. So, looking back at high school, I definitely thought, every other day, this is the end of the world. Oh, no. And in fact, it wasn't. So if I could have given myself that perspective, I probably would have been happier. But, the other thing is just take risks. Don't be afraid to be silly. Don't be afraid to fail. That's how we grow, and that's how we become better people.
And I guess this whole entire philosophy of learning from one's own mistakes and overcoming failure is part of the reason why American high schools are known as the high schools of participation trophies, because you're trying to encourage those who have went through failure and encourage them to learn from that in which they didn't manage to succeed.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you have that vision. I mean, I haven't been in high school for a long time. So when I think about participation trophies, I, in my head, associate that with younger kids in the United States, more like 5 to 10 years old, because, yeah, exactly right. We're trying to give people the freedom to fail, to say, hey, go out and try your best. And even if you fail, it's not a big deal. Pick yourself up. You can still try again tomorrow. But maybe that has moved into high schools now. I'm not really sure.
Well, sir, thank you for taking the time out of what I imagine must be an incredibly busy schedule to share these experiences and your knowledge with us. It is greatly appreciated and surely will be valued by both our listeners and our readers. So thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Petr. It was a pleasure.
A to byl pan Douglas Morro, ředitel amerických center a zástupce kulturního ataše americké ambasády v Praze. Díky, že jsi poslouchal 3. díl našeho podcastu Za školou. Pokud bys rád zjistil více o České středoškolské unii, určitě se podívej na náš Instagram, Facebook nebo Twitter, kde nám i můžeš nechat feedback k dnešní epizodě. Budeme se na tebe těšit zase příště, za školou.